Hello BookTube. Last week I mentioned wanting to do a video in which I give an overview of the poetry I've read so far in 2023. But the more I've thought about it, the more I'm thinking maybe I should do a deep dive into my reading relationship with poetry, sort of like my video on fantasy a few weeks ago. So that's what I'll do. Hopefully this video makes sense, um, because sometimes my reading life does not make a whole lot of sense. Anyway, so I so I first got into poetry during during a period of my reading life from about 18, maybe 17 to definitely it ended at 25, where I really enjoyed the books that I call classics canonical, or that I've grouped as classics canonical, modern and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama. So this would have been relatively early during my long science fiction and fantasy period, where this particular group of books would have been like a Regency period. And my first collection of poetry was a slim volume of Sappho, which I got, I think, probably 15, maybe 16. I don't quite remember. But I know for sure my first anthology of poetry that I really enjoyed, that I was really sort of excited to have, and to have for a very long time, because I still have it, even though I still have that slim volume of Sappho, is Word of Mouth, edited by Timothy Liu. And so I picked this up when I was 18. I'd gone to St. Edward's University in Austin to view the campus, and after that visit wrapped up, I made my first visit to Book People, the storied independent bookstore in Austin, Texas, which is absolutely amazing. And so I picked this anthology up, and I really enjoyed it. So many of the poets in here I later added to my collection, which was it wasn't big, it was small, although not the poultry collection that I had when I first started BookTube. So I picked up like Mark Doughty, Mark Wunderlich, Justin Chin, David Trinidad, Robert Duncan, Edgar Bowers, Edward Field, Frank O'Hara, James Merrill, Allen Ginsberg, James Broughton, and I think that's largely it that I can remember. And then I picked up other poets gradually during my college years, like Jory Graham, Wisława Zaborska, Jerry Gomez Perlberg, Sylvia Plath, so on and so forth. And but gradually, as that period where I was really into classics, canonical, modern, and contemporary fiction, poetry, and drama ended, I gradually got rid of most of those books to where only Word of Mouth, View with a Grain of Sand, what I had by Edward Field, my Changing Light at Sandover. It's really all I had. It's just like, it was a poetry collection. I have since, in the years since I first started BookTube, and certainly after 2021, I started to beef up my poetry collection, largely with more contemporary poets published by university presses. I have quite a few books from the Princeton poetry series, those published by University of Chicago Press or distributed by University of Chicago, and some by LSU and others. And I've been also picking up a lot of the collections that I had in the past, although I still haven't picked up Mark Dottie. I have a selected edition of his stuff, but I don't have the source. And I don't have any Justin Chen, which annoys me to no end. I would like to reread him, and David Trinidad, and so on and so forth. So, yeah. So, I've kind of started my poetry collection back up. It's no longer quite so paltry, and I've largely enjoyed what I've read, although poetry has never really emotionally impacted me. I know a lot of poetry fans talk about like that emotional impact, and it's never really done that for me. It's a bit more intellectual. And I'm not necessarily as passionate when I talk about poetry. It's usually, I like this collection, or I like most of the poems in this collection, or I didn't particularly care for this collection, but I never really give specifics. And that's, I guess, maybe because while I enjoy reading poetry in the moment, it's not really all that passionate, I think. So, and also I think because of how I tend to buy books, I tend to end up rereading a lot of the poetry, and that might be why some of the poetry I've read so far this year seems to be a bit disappointing because it hasn't been that long since I read them the last time I read them. But anyway, so all of that aside, what collections of poetry have I been reading so far this year? Well, I've had one bail, and it's a bitter bail, because this is one of the collections that I had earlier in my collection, and I'd gotten rid of it and regretted it for a number of years, and I finally picked it up about a year or so ago, and I've decided to read it for National Poetry Month, which was in April, and I just wasn't all that interested. And that was the collected poems of Frank O'Hara. So, yeah, because I really enjoyed the poems of his that I read in word of mouth, and I think in the anthologies I had for class. But, and also this collection, I remember really enjoying this collection when I read it the better part of, well, it wasn't quite 20 years ago. It would have been more like 16 or 17 years ago that I enjoyed reading it. But this most recent is just, I really didn't enjoy it all that much. Now, I might come back to it. I will come back to it and hope it was just I wasn't in the mood at the time, that I wanted to read something else. And it's sort of one of those things where the planned TBR or the curated TBR kind of coming up against the mood reading. So there was that. Then I also read like More Than This by David Kirby, which I just recently picked up from LSU late last year. And I know this was definitely a bail redemption, that I read it in December and I didn't, or November, and I didn't quite like it, but I came back to it and it's okay. I don't think it's one that I'm ultimately going to want to keep long term. And then I also reread the two collections I have by Fiona Z. Lorraine, The Ruined Elegance and Rain in Plural. So it had been a while since I read these the first time, and I remember quite liking both collections. But this reread, not so much. I kind of found them both a bit tiring which is disappointing. I also reread Stars in My Eyes by Edward Field, and I really did not get on with this reread, and I kind of, because this one I did definitely find a bit tiresome. As much as I've enjoyed Field's poetry in the past, it just, like this rereading, I'm just like, it's just a little too, not very well done. Which again was quite disappointing. I did read and really enjoy the selected poems of Giovanni Pascoli, which I picked up just recently from the Princeton University Press's sale. And this was quite good. I quite enjoyed it. That was one positive. And I also read for the first time and quite enjoyed the collected poems of George Safaris. I thought this was really good as well. Although maybe some of them I didn't quite get on with as well as I would have liked. And then I reread, and this is in no particular order, Tongues of Fire by Sean Hewitt. So when I first read this collection last year, I really enjoyed it. Absolutely, positively loved it. And this reading, I'm like, well, the earlier poems, they don't quite work as well as the later poems do. And there are some poems in the middle that I'm not so sure about. So it's, again, it was a much more critical reread. And then another poetry collection, or two more, that I had a bit more, not as satisfactory a reread as I would have liked, was Host and Guest by Nate Klug. I enjoyed immensely the first two times I've read this collection, but this third time, I still like most of the poems, but I don't know. And same is true, annoyingly, of Voluntary Servitude by Mark Wunderlich. Because normally this collection really does it for me, but this past time, it just really didn't. But hopefully another go at this collection will be a lot better. Now, there are some rereads that I had that were really good and that I didn't have any issues with. First up is my rereads of Austin Smith's collect poetry. I reread Almanac for the second time and Flyover Country for the third time, and I really enjoyed both of these. Again, like I mentioned in a comment, Austin Smith is one of my favorite poets, and definitely both of these collections really worked this past time. And I had a similar reaction to all of Catherine Carter's work, because I read The Memory of Guild for the first time, and then I reread The Swamp Monster at Home for the second time, possibly the third time, and Larvae of the Near Stars for definitely the third time. And I really enjoyed all three of these. Definitely, I really enjoyed them. And again, she's one of my favorite poets. And then I read Everything Except That I Know Of by Peter Campion. I had previously two of his collections, and I picked up the other two. So I read Other People for the first time. I reread The Lions for the third time or fourth time, El Dorado for the first time, and One Summer Evening at the Falls for the third time. And I have to say, this one was a very pleasant experience. I normally, when I've read Campion, I really like The Lions. Like, I think my favorite of his collections. And I struggled with a One Summer Evening at the Falls. But this reading, I really enjoyed all of these collections. And I even really liked One Summer Evening at the Falls. So, yeah. That was quite positive. Now, that brings me to what I read this past weekend. I'll talk a bit more about this on Weekly Reads, but I did reread A Little More Written on the Human by Gillian Conley. This would have been my third reading of this book. I read it the first time shortly after I bought it, and I had a mixed response to the collection at that time. And then I reread it last year in April, and I quite enjoyed it. And this reading was similarly positive. Some of the poems I didn't quite get on with as well as I would have liked, but for the most part, I really enjoyed the collection. And I reread The River Twice by Kathleen Graeber. I think I mentioned on Weekly Reads that I wasn't entirely sure if this was the first time or the second time I would be reading this book this year. It was the second time. As I was reading the collection, I'm pretty sure I've read this before. And so I went and looked, and yeah, I had already read it. And I didn't get on with it. I didn't care for this collection at all, honestly. Which I think was my reaction when I first read it. But I'm not entirely sure. And then because I actually don't quite remember. I could remember I read it, but not so much that my opinions about it or specifics. And then I reread Tanto Tanto by Marina Carrera, and I quite enjoyed it. I didn't love it as much this second time as I did the first time, but I still really enjoyed this collection. So it isn't all doom and gloom on the poetry front, and maybe what I need to do is let a lot of these poetry collections just sit for a year or two, or at least those that I do want to keep, and pick up some more, which hopefully I will be able to do soon. Maybe not necessarily this month, since this month is going to be manga heavy, but maybe in a few months, because Lindy of Lindy's Magpie Reads gave me some recommendations for some poetry, which I will definitely be looking to pick up in the next few months, and other poetry collections that grab my fancy. So anyway, so I guess it's a mixed bag, although not as depressing as I had feared it would have been. So anyway, so that's what I got for today. I'll be back tomorrow with a cook the book video, which is going to be fun. Although there won't be any cooking video, actual videos of me cooking. I'll just have pictures of the end results. And then on Friday will be Weekly Reads, and I might do, before I do Weekly Reads, I might do a video in which I solicit thoughts about what I should do for my 900th video. If I should do like an original tag video, which I have a few ideas for, or if I should do a Q&A tag or a Q&A video. So let me know if you have any ideas, and I'll probably do like a specific video for that, like ask for either comments, like suggestions of what I should do, not necessarily questions if it's going to be a Q&A. That'll be in a separate video. But anyway, BookTube, I'm starting to ramble, so I'm going to go ahead and sign up for now. So until I see you tomorrow, thank you, have a great afternoon, and stay safe.